Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the March 20th meeting of the Advisory Committee. I hope I am among the first to wish you happy spring. My heart is leaping. I'm reminded that we have several additional bodies in the audience who need to call to order.
Our meeting's already been called to order.
You're in good shape?
I call to order the 20 March 2019 meeting of the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee.
Everybody who needs to be in order is in order. Yes? Okay. The Advisory Committee sets aside time at the start of the meeting for public comments on items not on the agenda. Individuals may speak for up to 3 minutes. Would anyone like to speak on an item that is not on the agenda tonight? Okay. So we're going to move into the meat of our meeting, which is review of 5 warrant articles. The first of the warrant articles on the Personnel Board we are seeing for the first time tonight. It's coming to us for the first time. So we're going to have a hearing and a vote on that one. The other 4 articles, we already conducted a hearing on Monday night, well into the evening. So this evening is for the Advisory Committee to discuss, to deliberate, and to vote. And I do not expect to take public comment during that part of the meeting tonight. So let's begin with Article D, the report of the Personnel Board. Andy?
Thank you. The report indicates that the collective bargaining negotiations were concluded and contracts signed with the Fire Department Employees Union and the Public Works Employees Union, and sets forth the increases for the 3-year agreement with the Permanent Firefighters Association, including some retroactivity because those negotiations have been going on for some time. The Public Works Department unit report indicates 2 contracts were negotiated. Again, retroactivity involved because the negotiations went on for quite some time. A 1-year contract which concluded on June 30, 2017, and then a 3-year successor agreement which went into effect on July 1, 2017. Again, some retroactive pay increases as well as weekend bonus pay, meal allowance, and longevity pay increases. The Personnel Board, in addition to negotiating with the unions representing the town, except for the represents the town in negotiations with unions except for the school department, also sets salary schedules and employment policies for non-unionized town workers, and the report indicates that a general wage increase of 2% effective this coming July will go into effect for employees not covered by collective bargaining agreements. In addition, part of the personnel bylaw is the classification and pay scale, and periodically the Personnel Board is asked to review positions and see if they should be reclassified, and the position itself is classified, and then a second question may arise as to whether the incumbent in that position should be changed to a different step in the new classification. Those decisions were made and are set forth in the report. In addition, the Personnel Board approved a job description for a new position of water superintendent, set the salary scale at grade 20. This, of course, is in the event of an affirmative vote at the 29 annual meeting. The position now exists. It's in the town's classification, wage and classification system, but whether it will be fulfilled, of course, awaits the town. Finally, there's the temporary step increase with regard to acting lieutenants, and that was again retroactive to July 1, 2018. The Personnel Board report has been reviewed and accepted by the Board of Selectmen. And my recommendation is that this body accept the report as well. And therefore, if you take a look at the comment with regard to Article D, if anybody has any questions about the comment, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Otherwise, I'll read my recommended motion.
Let's just take a breath and see if we have any questions.
Yeah, Andy, I have a quick question about, I suppose, a larger compensation issue. I hope it's not an unfair question to you.
That will range.
Yeah, we'll see. Do we track, well, what I will call total compensation in addition to cash compensation? That is the value of all the fringe benefits, and do we track that to market? And that leads to a second question I have, and that is, are we offering an attractive employment proposition to candidates outside of Hingham? And I know it's more than cash. I know it has to do with personnel policies such as family-friendly kinds of policies. But is that something that our personnel board worries about and addresses?
I can answer from my own experience. I was on the personnel board and chaired it for several years. And the answer to both your questions is yes. We do track what is going on in the market, and Hingham has a list of 20 municipalities that we look to as to give us some sense of where we are in different categories. One of the things we look at is pay scales in other towns. We don't try to find towns that mirror Hingham, but we try to get a range of towns.
The local markets, or
Yes.
Yeah.
And the personnel board are very conscious of that during the negotiations and in the discussions with regard to the classification and pay scale. We do, in discussions with department heads, also talk about whether they are having difficult times filling positions or not. Are we a sufficiently attractive employer that we can attract the caliber, not only fill the position, but attract the caliber of candidate that we want? In my experience here, we were able to do that. If we felt a weakness, we addressed it in the pay scale, typically. And I have not heard of any instances since my days on the board where the Hingham has been perceived to be so far behind any other town that its positions go wanting.
Yeah. Oh, good. Thank you.
Additional comments additional discussion from the committee?
Just a quick one. Andy, so is the $230,500 that's in here, so is that when we approved in Article 6 the union or the different employees that this relates to? So this obviously is a warrant article, it's for it's for fiscal 20. So is this, when we approve that separately, we have to just go ahead and move forward with the operating budget approval, and then this just kind of comes in and I guess augments that?
Well, we have
Based on the contract?
we have the retroactive pay increases and other benefits to deal with, which I think makes up the lion's share of that 230.
Okay.
Is that right? Oh, and then, I'm sorry, then of course you have the non-union, which doesn't come in at the time the numbers go into Article 6. So the 2% increase is an addition, for the non-union.
Yep.
Is in addition to the numbers in Article 6.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then, Andy, I take it from the
Victor, use the mic.
Andy, I take it from the dates in the two collective bargaining units that they're going to be right at it again to negotiate new
unfortunately,
agreements?
that is the case, which again, unfortunately, is not all that uncommon.
Additional questions? Ready for a motion? Andy?
I move that the report of the Personnel Board, a copy of which is on file in the town clerk's office, be accepted. That the amendments of the personnel bylaw, including the classification and salary plan, and any cost item agreements reached by the Personnel Board in collective bargaining, which may be embodied or referred to in said report, be approved and adopted in their entirety. Such approval and adoption to become effective July 1, 2019, or as otherwise specified, I beg your pardon, in said report or agreements. In addition, that the town raise and appropriate the sum of $230,500 for the purpose of this vote, and that the town accountant is hereby authorized and instructed to allocate some sum to and among the several personnel services and its expense accounts in such amounts respectively as are proper and required to meet such amendments and to comply with such collective bargaining agreements as may be entered into by the Board of Selectmen of the town.
Second?
Is there additional discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? 12-0? Okay. Very good. Thank you, Andy. So we move now to the advisory committee's discussion and deliberation on Article MM having to do with the water company acquisition. I will observe that we received several letters from, a letter from an Aquarian attorney and a letter from a town attorney today, which everyone on the advisory committee has had a copy of. Victor, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I'll point out one, I guess, significant change from the draft that we saw on Monday. The requested amount now for the borrowing is up to $114 million. So it's not anticipated that they're going to be spending $114 million. The idea is, the belief is that the purchase price remains at $107,800,000, but the extra $2 million is a contingency. We discussed the other day as to how the price adjusts based on a formula, and to keep a cushion in case that price is higher than expected. The request is now to borrow up to $114 million, but the town would only borrow what's actually needed for the transaction. So, Donna, do you want to just have a general discussion on this, or?
Yeah, are there, are there discussion items, comments that folks want to make before we move to officially make a motion and move into the formal part, or shall we start with making the motion? What's your preference?
Well, I know I mentioned to you, Donna, by email that I have some comments in the opponent section that I want to incorporate. So just because of our rushed timing, I've not been able to get that incorporated. So I'll either, depending on what time we break tonight, I have a lot of that already written down, so I'll incorporate it into that and get it to you.
So you have some suggestions to
Yes.
Victor to enhance
Yes.
the comment?
Yes.
Okay.
I prepared an overview of my thoughts.
Go for it.
Donna, could I ask just one?
Yes.
If I might, I do have a more general comment that I'd just like to make on reflecting on some of Monday's information. I don't want to get in Bob's way, but if Bob's going to kick off the roundtable,
We're not doing the round table yet. We'll
okay.
let Bob
Sorry, go ahead.
no, but I'd like you to do your remarks first.
Oh, okay.
And then
Happy
we'll
to-
focus on the discussion.
Okay, great, thanks. As a volunteer for the town of Hingham, who has spent a lot of time over the last few months looking at this issue objectively, I wanted to comment on what we heard from Charles Ferlot, Aquarian CEO, in prepared remarks he delivered on Monday. You can find them at about the 1 hour and 8 minute mark in the March 18th Advisory Committee meeting video on YouTube. I want to talk first about what the Aquarian CEO said, and then I want to talk about what he did not say. At the outset, he said that it is, quote, all about infrastructure replacement. I think the town would agree. Hence the significance of the charts we have seen pointing out underinvestment in the system in recent years based on Aquarian's own data. He stated that governments, quote, don't have enough capital to address the needs of utilities, end quote. Ultimately, however, it is the ratepayers who will fund investment in this water system regardless of who owns the water company. However, under town ownership, the Commonwealth may help augment the capital according to the documents we received from Mr. Matthews and the Keep Aquarian group on Monday. Both the 2017 Auditor's Report and the Water Infrastructure Finance Commission report talk about grants and low-interest loans from the state for municipalities to make water infrastructure investments. Mind you, no low-interest loans or grants were included in the sensitivity analysis presented on Monday. Including them would increase savings under town ownership. The Aquarian CEO then criticized the town's financial advisor, Anderson Tax. Anderson Tax was asked for a working version of its spreadsheet, and according to Mr. Ferlat, quote, couldn't give it up, unquote. The Aquarian CEO went on to say that, quote, the star witness was not cooperating, unquote. I have not read the engagement letter between the town and Anderson Tax that laid out the deliverables in that relationship, but I have spent time with the Anderson Tax analysis, and while it is true that the full analysis was provided with values, not formulas, in each cell in their spreadsheet, that did not hinder me or Aquarian and their financial advisor from critiquing it. In fact, Aquarian's financial advisor produced a 17-page report reviewing Anderson Tax's work and made no mention that I saw about the model not being usable or being the result of someone, quote, not cooperating. Our subcommittee received at least 6 more letters from Aquarian and their advisors over the course of our hearings. These letters commented in detail on the Anderson Tax financial model. None of the letters mentioned that the Anderson Tax model without formulas was a problem in completing their analysis. In fact, it was Aquarian who incorrectly asserted that Anderson Tax had used an incorrect value in their model. Aquarian then had to retract that assertion with an apology and a March 8th letter to our committee. Finally, I was struck by the Aquarian CEO's description of the social media discussion. He referred to, quote, the toxic cauldron of hatred, unquote, on social media. I suggest people judge for themselves if that is a fair characterization based on the screenshots appended to the letter we received on Monday from Mr. Matthews and the Keep Aquarian group. Now let's talk briefly about what the Aquarian CEO did not say. We know that Aquarian has spent good money to understand the advisory committee and our process. Therefore, his prepared remarks on Monday represented his closing argument to the advisory committee. Despite this, missing from his remarks was any discussion of the substantive issues our subcommittee and this group have been exploring and that the town will consider at town meeting. For example, he made no comments about the financial sensitivity analysis showing savings under town ownership. He made no comments about the data indicating Aquarian's historical underinvestment in the water system. And he made no comments about Aquarian's historical lack of financial participation in the town's efforts to protect land in the watershed. Why did we hear from the chief executive officer of Aquarian Water Company about the tenor of posts on a Facebook page, but not a word about these substantive items? Perhaps it is because there is no argument on these items.
Thank you, Dave. Yes. Sure.
So I wanted to, before we got too far into the discussion tonight of the merits of buying the water company, should the town or should the town not buy the water company, I wanted to close the loop on a process issue that I raised at the subcommittee meeting last Wednesday, which had to do with whether that decision could be or ought to be submitted to a referendum, effectively, to a ballot vote at the town election that will follow town meeting. Can you take one and pass it down? And so I'm passing around a spreadsheet that I had punched up one night last week between about 10 in the evening and 2 in the morning, shortly before the subcommittee meeting. The subcommittee has already seen this. Other members of the advisory committee haven't. But, without going through slide by slide, I could just walk you through some of my thinking and some of what I found on this issue. But I won't bury the lead. The way I'm going to conclude my remarks is by saying that, to my disappointment, this isn't an angle that I plan to press tonight. So, you'll see in the second page of the slide deck my conclusions about this issue, which is that submitting the purchase to the voters for confirmation at the ballot in addition to town meeting is not required, but is something that town meeting can choose to do and might be the right thing to do. The third page of my slide deck, and I'm sorry we don't have the ability to put it on the screen for those in the audience, the third page of the slide deck is a cut and paste of the relevant section of the 1879 statute. And you'll see what the language there says is that the town of Hingham shall have the right at any time during the continuance of the charter to purchase the corporate property of what's now Aquarian. And then I've also highlighted a few lines later on, an additional relevant part that says that the town's authority to purchase the franchise and property is granted on the condition that the same is assented to by said town by a 2/3 vote of the voters present and voting thereon at any annual meeting, which is, of course, the town meeting. We know from previous legal decisions, specifically a case in which Cohasset's water company challenged the town of Cohasset's purchase of it. This is back in the 1940s. That case went to the SJC, and the SJC actually looked at identical language, very same language in Cohasset's water company charter, and said that that's complete. What that means, what that very language means, is that town meeting by 2/3 is sufficient. That's enough to buy the water company right there. You don't need to go to a ballot. You don't need to do anything else. But moving on to the fourth slide of my deck on the second page, my view of the relevant question is not whether town meeting's vote is complete, but whether it can be added to voluntarily by town meeting. In other words, even if a ballot vote isn't required under the statute, is it something that town meeting could choose to do voluntarily by approving a recommended motion, or really any motion, that makes its approval of the purchase contingent on the ballot vote? Let me say that again, because I know that's a lot of legal stuff right there. The way that I figured this could potentially be done is town meeting passes a motion that says, in effect, yes, we're going to buy it, provided that our approval of this purchase as town meeting only becomes effective if it also gets a majority at the ballot. So I'll come back to that in a moment, but in my view, it's something that town meeting can choose to do. Moving on to the next couple slides, I speak about why it might be the right thing to do, and there's really two basic reasons why that's so. The first is that it respects the spirit of Proposition 2.5, which, of course, is the state law that requires issuance of large amounts of debt that are going to raise your taxes to be approved by the voter before it can go into effect. Now, we're actually outside of the letter of Proposition 2.5 because this debt won't be paid for through taxes. It'll be paid for through rates. Nobody's taxes are going to go up, and so therefore Proposition 2.5 doesn't require it to go to the ballot. But interesting thing about this debt is that it's general obligation bonds, not revenue bonds, which means that it's ultimately backstopped by the taxpayers and by the town's taxing power. And in my view, that kind of flags that in a lot of ways it would respect the spirit of Proposition 2.5 to allow the taxpayers who are going to backstop this to weigh in on it. Next slide speaks about maximizing participation, what a big decision this is. I know that every member of the committee is aware of what a big decision this is and what responsibility the town is proposing to take on. And then the next slide that includes a chart is some numbers that I collected about attendance at town meeting compared to attendance at the annual town election that takes place every spring. And what you see there is that really the most hot button, highly attended town meeting still draws out fewer people than the sleepiest, lowest turnout town election. And in fact, usually, in most years, the spread between the number of people who come to the first night of a town meeting and the number of people who cast a ballot in the town election is usually several thousand, between 2,000 and 4,000. And so if it's important to us to maximize voter participation in this decision, it seems pretty clear that putting it on the ballot in some form would achieve that. So the next couple of pages, I laid out a plan, and this is last week when I first made this presentation to the subcommittee. I laid out a plan for how this could happen with the short time that's remaining to us. And that plan basically consisted of 2 steps that had to happen in tandem, not sequentially. They had to happen at the same time. The first step is that town meeting agrees to share its exclusive authority to purchase the water company with a ballot vote. The second step is that it actually be placed on the ballot. So with respect to that first step, in the next slide that begins, town meeting agrees to share authority, I spoke about how the motion at town meeting could include some language that makes adoption of the article contingent on the results of a ballot vote. And then in the next slide that says, get the question on the ballot, I spoke about one way that it could be put on the ballot, and that is as a non-binding public opinion advisory question under that provision of the general laws, Chapter 53, Section 18A. That is a provision of the general laws that is often used by elected officials to kind of test the sense of the people. It's non-binding in the sense that that the result of the vote doesn't require elected or appointed officials to abide by it, but that doesn't mean that town meeting couldn't agree to abide by it anyhow. Section 53, Chapter 18A could serve as a vehicle to get this question on the ballot, and it will be up to town meeting to include in its recommended, or in the motion that it passes, language to the effect of, well, we're going to honor the result of that vote. But part of the trick with this particular statute, Chapter 53, Section 18A, is that it allows either the Board of Selectmen or town meeting itself to put a question on the municipal ballot, but it only allows a question to be put on the ballot of a regular town election, not a special election, and the question has to be placed on the ballot by either the selectmen or town meeting 35 days in advance of the election. And what that means, because our town meeting meets 5 days before the election, is that really the only body at this point that can put it on the ballot for the upcoming town election on April 27th is the Board of Selectmen. And we're actually still within the 35-day window. That 35-day window clocks out this coming Saturday, the 23rd. I should mention there's also citizens have the ability to petition a question onto a ballot using the same statute, but that actually requires a 90-day advance notice. It actually gives the selectmen the opportunity to adopt the question, put it on the ballot themselves, and then if they reject it, the petition can go forward. But it has to be presented to the selectmen 90 days before the election. 90 days before the election was actually even before the selectmen voted to put this on the warrant, so that was never really an option. By the time the deadline for that arrived, nobody was certain that it was going to be at town meeting this year. And then the last slide, I include a couple of graphics talking about one time that an official who had the right to do something just by saying, I want to do it, chose to defer to the results of one of these non-binding advisory opinion questions under Chapter 53, Section 18A. That was Governor Weld in the very early years of his administration. He actually inherited a fully complete, ready-to-go proposal to build the Greenbush line, and there was a lot of opposition to it at the time. There was a lot of opposition to it in Hingham because at the time, the plan didn't include the tunnel through downtown. They were just going to send the train right through downtown. So what Governor Weld said shortly after he took office in the beginning of 1991 was, well, we're going to put this to these non-binding advisory opinion questions on the ballots of the regular town elections where the towns where the train would be running through. And, I'm not going to do it unless the towns agree to do it. And so the graphic at the bottom of my final slide there is a snippet from, it's a screen grab from Hingham's 1991 town election ballot that asked the people, well, should we do this train line right through downtown Hingham? That failed in Hingham. It passed in the other communities on the South Shore, but it failed in Hingham. And Governor Weld abided by his agreement, at least for a couple of years. And those couple of years gave Hingham the breathing space and the time to negotiate what ultimately became the tunnel and the mitigation fund and so on and so forth. But my point in the last slide is that there's a precedent for an official who has the power to just make a decision, choosing to defer to one of these non-binding advisory opinion questions on the ballot. So I made these same remarks, or very similar ones, to the subcommittee last Wednesday, and the attorney who is representing the town on this matter was there at the meeting, and pretty promptly at that meeting rendered his opinion that this wasn't viable. And I don't want to speak for him, but his position, as I understand it, goes back to the statutory language on the third slide of my deck, that where it says, the town of Hingham shall have the right to purchase the water company, granted on the condition that the same is assented to by said town by 2/3 vote at town meeting. His opinion was that that means that town meeting cannot choose to share its authority with anybody else. So I actually followed up with the attorney several times in the week since that meeting and asked, well, what are you relying on when you say that? Is there a case? Is there a statute? Frankly, is there something that I haven't thought about? Because I have no intention and no desire to propose something that's just going to get the town into trouble. And I never really got an answer to that question. If I were the town's lawyer, I would probably be reaching a different conclusion, or I would at least be taking this issue much more seriously and looking into it to be confident that it can't be done or can be done, or what the risks or what the benefits are. But the bottom line fact of the matter is I'm not the town's lawyer, and I don't get paid to advise the town. The lawyer who rendered that opinion does. That being the case, I don't see any profit for anybody in me putting forward, continuing to push this idea, putting forward an amendment to tonight's recommended motion or anything like that. I think that would be extremely awkward for me to suggest something that would ask the advisory committee and the town meeting to override the advice of its own lawyer. But that having been said, I wanted to be clear, I disagree with this advice, and I take this issue very seriously. Since I made this proposal at the subcommittee a week ago, I've really been touched by the number of people who have mentioned to me, yeah, that's a great idea, we ought to do it, keep pushing for it. I got about a half dozen emails the day after I made this presentation. I had somebody who I didn't know come up and introduce herself before we began our meeting in this room 2 nights ago, saying, thank you for doing that, keep pushing it. I had somebody come up to me at the dump right by the glass recycling on Sunday afternoon saying, I'm glad you did that, I'm in favor of it, and so are all my neighbors. And we all know that we've received several letters in recent days from citizens who are very interested in this. So, it's with great reluctance that I come to the conclusion that I do. But again, the conclusion that I do is I don't feel like I'm in a position to ask the advisory committee or town meeting to override the advice of its own lawyer.
Debeline?
May I respond? I watched the tape, or I was here and then watched the tape again of the subcommittee meeting. And as a relative newcomer to New England, because I've only been here 30 years or so, when I moved here, town meeting was not something I was familiar with, and I remember my first town meeting, I think there were visitors from the Soviet Union, and I wondered, why they were here. The moderator had admitted them. But after hearing Eric's proposal the other night, I gave some more thought to this, and I actually, because I too am a lawyer, and I'm not going into the legality of what was the advice or not advice. I'm going really to what is the purpose of town meeting. And so I found that the essential characteristic of town meeting is that all qualified inhabitants of the town meet to deliberate and vote on the important issues of the day. I can't think there's any issue probably more important this year than this one in that context. And in thinking about the town meeting as being the legislative body of the town that exercises the town's corporate powers, the discussion part seems to me to be particularly important. And as somebody who was very somewhat suspicious of town meeting, perhaps when I first moved here, I have come to really appreciate that debate that goes on. And I think voting without participation in a debate, if we're a legislative body, if town meeting is really the legislative body, I would hope Congress would do more debating and listening. And I think that's what goes on at town meeting. And I think last year of two big issues that I went to town meeting not sure of what my position was, and I was persuaded. And that's not the first time that it's happened. So I think the right to vote is important, but I think in issues that are really about the legislation and what the town should be doing, that deliberative quality is most important. And there are always going to be some people who can't participate. That's going to be true on election day as well. But I also always think that the right to participate and the right to vote also includes the right not to do those things. So I think most people who are most concerned about this issue will be, I would hope, at town meeting, and they can be persuaded and heard. So it's just a different view of the purpose in that context.
Libby?
Yep. I would just add, I mean, I already know of a bunch of people that have come up and said, you know, I have an opinion on this issue, but I can't attend town meeting, I'm having surgery or this. And I think that town meeting's taped, and people can go back and watch it. The warrant will have a lot of detail in it. So, I mean, I actually first brought up the issue of the ballot at our very first subcommittee meeting, actually, and I think there were a lot of other topics on this that took us in different directions. But I think, you know, I didn't realize when Eric was kind of come to the subcommittee, and I was glad that you brought the issue back up. I think it's important, and I would just say that there's no question more people have an opportunity to get to the polls, and I think if they want to get informed on the issue, they can. It's running on cable constantly, town meeting, and they have the warrant to rely on, so they can still hear all the debate. So I, having brought it up initially, would like to see it too, but realize that at this point, you know, we are where we are, so.
Are we ready to move? Oh, I'm sorry, Ed. Excuse me. Bob.
I'm even newer than Waverly. I've been in New England for 5 years, which means I'm basically off the boat. And I'm familiar with city governance in the Midwest and in the South and many other parts of the country. But the town governance is new to me, and the more I have learned about it, the more I have come to appreciate the power of town meeting. How many times I have gone to a ballot box and I've looked at a very important issue and I was required to check yes or no. Either I already came in knowing how I wanted to vote, or I wasn't sure. So I picked something. Town meeting requires everyone who is going to vote, whether you've got an opinion or whether you haven't formed an opinion yet, to listen to both sides. You got no choice. And I think that is a strength of what Hingham enjoys, that I hope the people who have been here, whose families have been here since the 17th century, I hope they don't take that for granted and give that up too easily. So I'm kind of with Daveline that I think because this is so important and is so controversial, and because opinions, I think, perhaps have solidified across various lines, I think it's particularly important that the people who are going to vote hear both sides of the issue in a very considered and rational way. So I'll quit talking. Thank you.
Still want to say something, Bob?
I'll be very brief. I first wanted to endorse what Daveline and Ed just said. I think that is what town meeting is all about. I want to thank Eric for his creative thinking. I do respectfully disagree with my learned colleague. I think the town council did get it right. We have a statutory method for this approval. Unlike the statute for Prop 2.5, doesn't provide that you have to have a confirming ballot vote. And I only see an opportunity for mischief in the event that there were an advisory vote at an election after the real legal work has been done at town meeting. So I'll leave it at that, since there's no motion for us to address tonight.
Shall we move to, move from process to considering the meat? Victor, why don't you put the motion on the floor, and then we'll see if we need to, we'll have continued discussion.
So the motion as drafted is recommended that the town of Hingham hereby exercises its right to purchase the corporate property and all of the rights, privileges, and franchises of the Hingham Water Company, now owned by Aquarian Water Company of Massachusetts, Inc., and/or Aquarian Water Capital of Massachusetts, Inc., their successors and/or assigns, including, but not limited to, the water system and treatment plant. All is authorized under Chapter 139 of the Acts of 1879 as amended, and as confirmed in Town of Hingham versus Aquarian Water Company of Massachusetts, Inc. and Aquarian Water Capital of Massachusetts, Inc., 92 Mass Appeals Court 430, cited 2017, for the purchase price as determined by the final judgment entered by the Suffolk County Superior Court in Civil Action Number SUCV 2013-03159-BLS2, as calculated in accordance with the formula contained in said judgment as of the date of this vote, and that the town appropriate $114 million to fund said purchase and to fund the repayment of litigation expenses and other costs incurred in connection with the acquisition, and to fund first-year capital costs for said water system, and that the town authorize the Town of Hingham Board of Selectmen to take all actions necessary to complete said purchase. To meet said appropriation, the treasurer, with the approval of the Board of Selectmen, is authorized to borrow said sum under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 8, Paragraph 3, or any other enabling authority, and to issue bonds or notes of the town therefore. Any premium received by the town upon the sale of any bonds or notes approved by this vote, less any such premium applied to the payment of the costs of issuance of such bonds or notes, may be applied to the payment of costs approved by this vote in accordance with Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 20, thereby reducing the amount authorized to be borrowed to pay such costs by a like amount.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, now we're in a period of conversation and discussion, if we are so inclined to have further conversation and discussion. Anyone want to make some points that have not been made yet? My committee is being a little bit shy because I have told everyone that when we come to, before we vote, when we come to the point where the committee indicates they are ready to vote, I have told everyone, and I'm going to mimic Victor, which I try to do regularly, by giving everyone an opportunity to go around the table and make an observation, make a comment. I've told everybody that this is voluntary and they don't have to, they can just say pass. But I think everybody is confused as to whether we're there or not. We're not there yet. Is there any more general discussion that we would like to have before we find ourselves ready to vote? Go ahead.
Sure. I think it might make sense for someone on the subcommittee that's spent countless hours in meetings on this issue. I prepared a lot more than I probably will get into, but I'm just going to try to hit some of the high points. One thing, I guess, before I get into my comments that I just really want to clarify is that when I looked at the presentation from the town forum, which I wasn't able to attend, to have people in town, and then the slides that were presented to us, there was at least one slide where, it said manage phone bank for advisory committee. But then when I kept zooming in on here to look at it at our meeting, I realized it said manage phone bank for advisory committee meeting, which says something totally different. And, I think I totally understand whether someone's a proponent or opponent, that they're going to be advocating to get people to come to our meetings and to make comments and whatnot. So I think that I would just love to have that slide at a minimum, and maybe go back and have those just adjusted on the PowerPoints that are on for the forum and for our meeting, and if they're also shown at town meeting, because, the screenshots that are there are very tiny. I had a hard time reading it. I zoomed in as much as I could here, but I would just ask that those be corrected, because, I think that will just eliminate any misunderstanding that might lead somebody to believe that, and question the integrity of this committee, and I wouldn't want them to do that. Also, I guess, regarding the advocacy issue, this committee has no more control over Keep Aquarian than we do over Hingham Citizens for Water and the allies that they work with. And, both sides are completely entitled to do whatever advocacy efforts they want, but we have no control over it, and we're not under any undue influence by anybody to come to any conclusions. These are our own independent conclusions after hours of research and meetings, and I just wanted to make that clear in case it wasn't. And then as far as just kind of looking at this overall, I think I want I want this committee before, and then ultimately this will be the same case at town meeting, but I really want you to look at it that you really have to decide two things when you cast your vote on this issue. I think you have to look at it as a taxpayer. Do you think that it's feasible and advisable for the town to purchase the water company? And as a ratepayer and customer of the water system, do you feel that it's feasible and advisable for you and your family that the town acquire and run the water company? This is a complicated issue. It's multifaceted, that involves a lot significant financial, operational, and governance issues. And, certainly the town researched it and has decided that purchasing this is feasible and advisable for the town. And the selectmen and WASC, as we know, agreed, both voted unanimously for this and came to the same conclusion. But I think we all have to ask ourselves, and ultimately the citizens at town meeting will have to answer those two questions for themselves. Again, if they think it's feasible for the town to, and whether they think it's feasible, as a ratepayer, if they think it's feasible and advisable for them and their family. And as far as, I know there was some questions. I think it might have come up maybe at our briefing last week, I think it was, just on the purchase price. And, it seems like the big difference there seems twofold to me, and I just wanted to clarify it, whether you include the interest and you don't. And I think in the letter that we got from, I think it was Andy, mentioned that, you get a truth in lending when you buy a home, and that would include what the full boat is. I think one aspect in looking at the Anderson tax model, I would not include the CapEx in that. So I don't know. So we have sort of what we're paying for it at 108, and then you've got numbers out there where people say it's 250. I wouldn't include the CapEx in that, because that's just a part of operations. That's something that gets financed as part of operations. But I would certainly include the purchase price, the reimbursements to fund balance. So if you take that number, that's 109 million. And of course, the ultimate price, like you said, Victor, will have to be verified. And I don't know if that's done with, the town and Aquarian. I don't know if the court's involved, but that will be confirmed, that number. But if you take the, where it is from the Anderson model and apply the rate that's used in the model for the first year interest at the short-term rate, and then the 29-year long-term rate, again, just on that 109 million. The total is 177 million. So just for the purposes of whether your mind thinks what are you buying it for ultimately, or what's your truth in lending saying, I mean, that's the full boat on the acquisition. And again, I did not include CapEx because that's something that's an operational issue and would be paid by ratepayers, the debt service on that. And I think one other issue too is that, when Dave and I had our talk with bond counsel, municipalities do fund acquisitions of water systems with either revenue or with general obligation debt. I'm going to mention a couple governance issues that to me, because this is such a unique situation with the number of out-of-town ratepayers, I think I've always said, and I know I probably sound like a parrot on this one, but I've always said that I felt better with the revenue bond option because it would in a sense be like a Hingham Municipal Light. It would be a separate corporation entity, stay on its own, no liability to taxpayers. It would independently operate. And then, with whether it's the sensitivity analysis that you did, Dave, I mean, if it sounds like they're saying there is at least, 100 basis points, 1% cushion in that acquisition debt number. So then that means the numbers as they stand in the model would support if revenue bonds were used to fund it, because I think that the selectman quoted that it was about 100 basis point spread between the GO bond and the revenue bond. So, I mean, the model seems to would satisfy that financial obligation. So I think that the one thing that is, I think a big factor maybe why it wasn't is that, you do have to go to the legislature, and we have a lot of attorneys in the room. I'm not one of them, but that is something I think you have to go to the legislature for to be able to get approval, because municipalities can't on their own issue revenue bonds. They have to get authority from the state. So were that route to be pursued, this topic would not be able to be brought before this 2019 town meeting. It wouldn't, that approval wouldn't have occurred. So, again, I think that's a route I would have liked to see more discussion on and consideration of, but I think the horse is probably out of the barn on that one. And, water rates, I think that a lot's been talked about with, who can run the water company for less, and is this going to be cheaper, and what about this? And, I think regardless of what the answer to that is that we were told in a subcommittee meeting, and it's a quote, that rates will not go down, but they'll increase less than they will under Aquarian. So, and I actually was kind of surprised by that, because I assumed that with all these wonderful, all these savings, that we'd see decreases. And then I think initially we were told that those rates would be stabilized for 2 years, but now I think the position is that they're only stabilizing it for 1 year, and based on the fact that it's not going to go down, then I don't know if that means then they're going to go up for that second year, but and we know from the Barry Dunn from one of the town's experts that they use that indicated that the 10% that was used in the Anderson model over 3 years, which is 3.3% per year, was conservative and reasonable. So we kind of know over time what that number is going to be, and I think that one other lever that's huge in this transaction is the O&M vendor cost, and that's something that I kind of took the 30-year, if you want, enterprise fund budget and looked at it and said, that's something that we don't have binding quotes on, and I guarantee you that it's going to be more than I think the estimate that's on there. And so I think that there's an absolute relationship between what the rates are going to be, the water rates will be, and that the cost of that, because that's the second biggest number. We know what the debt service is, and that's just has to be paid. And so, just bumping up that O&M vendor cost by 5% gets us just under 3% water rate increase. So I look at that and say, well, if we're off that 5% on the O&M cost, then our water rates are going to end up being not that far off with the annual increases where they are now. And just a couple things on the quotes is that, they aren't binding. And I don't know about anybody else, but whenever you go somewhere and you look for a quote on something and what's your zip code? And then you give them your zip code, and all of a sudden it's like, I ended up going to Stoughton for a root canal because it was going to be way more in Hingham. It just, that's just the way it is.
No Hingham prices, Libby?
No, I got a price, but it was, it was more, I'll tell you that. And, I just think with a number that is the second biggest and most significant cost with this acquisition is that we should know what that number is before the purchase, because one other thing we heard that changed over time is that originally the plan was to have the water supervisor oversee the capital vendor, which is separate from the O&M vendor. But now it's the O&M vendors under the capital, or the capital vendors under the O&M vendor. Well, that means there's more that oversight now that we're asking the O&M vendor to do for us, that's not going to be for free. That has a cost associated with it. And I have no idea if that was in the original RFP. I know that people that are a lot more versed in what should be in that RFP have, said it seems like there's definitely things missing. So, and at least I think we heard at a meeting, and I did look up online, and I know at least one of those companies that gave us a non-binding estimate, they've had some issues in municipalities and have been sued for subpar performance. And that worries me because that number is again, I can't keep saying it, is the second largest lever in the financial feasibility of this model. And I think that to not have a binding quote before, we are going to be a captive audience to the handful of O&M vendors that can do what we need them to do. And I think we're going to pay the price for that because they're going to know we need their help, and we're going to have to pay for it. And then, I think as far as operating, I didn't get a chance to highlight a couple things that because I'm not going to get into everything, but, I would just say that, it's one thing to be able to afford to purchase the water company, and it's really entirely something else to be able to run it. And that this is not just a financial issue. And I really mentioned about the O&M vendor and capital vendors because that's critical. I mean, those are the people that are on the ground, in the field, doing the work, working on the infrastructure, testing our water. And they have the ultimate responsibility to ensure that our water's safe. I mean, that's huge. And I know with what I saw in one of those non-binding vendors, I don't know that I would want them to have that responsibility for my water. And then, there's been talk now about maybe the outsourcing of that vendor would only happen initially, and that ultimately the town would take it over. But, I mean, if you look at the alternative of what if we do have issues with the O&M vendor and we're in this contract, sure, there's legal recourse, but do we want to really have to go down that road if we feel like we didn't make the best decision? And I mean, I'm not going to get into unaccounted for water because every water system has it, and I think the DEP limit, I think we've heard, there's 100% of what's in Acker Pond was unaccounted for, but I mean the DEP limit is there'd be about 62% of Acker Pond is allowable to be unaccounted for, and no water system is free of unaccounted for water. So I think that's a little alarmist to put the argument that way. And governance. I have a lot of governance issues, and I will just say that this idea that there's 41 comparable communities, that is not so. We are such an outlier in this category. I've said this all the time, at every, any opportunity that I've mentioned my concerns in this issue, is that there is no other municipality in the state that even comes close to having 38% of the ratepayers outside of the town. And then people say, well, if these other ones can do it, well, why can't we? Because we're nothing like them. They aren't in our situation, and I don't know. Maybe that's why Hingham hasn't bought the water company when they've had this option they could exercise for 140 years, and the town has not decided to pursue this. So I think there are reasons, and we are not like any of these other communities. And I mean, I have a lot of friends in Hull, and the old saying of don't do business with friends and family. I said this before too. I look at, the road diet topic. I know that came up at a meeting, Julie, where it was just, Hingham people got excoriated for that, and that was a temporary situation. And I think actually, even though we were working with the state on it, this is going to be a permanent situation where Hingham owns the water company, and where I thought of a scenario, and I said, oh my gosh, what if next thing you know, someone gets behind on their bills in Hull, and then their water gets shut off? Guess who's going to get, I don't want that relationship with my neighbors. I don't want that kind of a business relationship with them, and, that's all I guess I can say on that. And I think that to not link the fact that this issue in lockstep, if you look back at town warrants, has started when the discussions of developing South Hingham started. It just did. Those happened at the same time, and the only thing preventing at this point the town from developing South Hingham is that it doesn't have the infrastructure, and it doesn't necessarily have all the water supply. So now they can, if by controlling the water supply, they can get more water to be able to develop that. Now, some people may say, that's fabulous. Hey, great, let's do it. I grew up in Hingham. I have not always lived here, but I've been here most of my life, and it is so different with the traffic, and just, we can't keep, overdevelopment does not help traffic, it doesn't help with, abutters. It's just, there's a lot of things about that. Now, everyone can have their own opinion about that, but I do think it's important for people when they vote on this issue to realize that there is linkage there, no matter what anybody tells you. There's a long trail of things being done to be able to get to this point. This is the biggest piece of it, biggest piece in that puzzle, but it is nonetheless, a piece of that puzzle. And, yes, DEP is going to be testing the water, but then, once again, we don't know the caliber of scientists, of engineers that are going to be working for this O&M vendor. We're at their mercy to make sure that, to hope that they're doing their job and that they don't have an issue. And I think now, and a question came up at Monday night's meeting about how will the water supply be guaranteed? And one of the selectmen said, we're still fleshing that out. I think the time for fleshing out on a $112 million transaction is over. Like, we either know what we want to do now and we move forward, or we say, this is moving too fast and there are some significant issues that we need to make sure that we address. And then I can't opine on this statement, but it was again mentioned at Monday night's meeting that Hyannis is the gold. Well, I know from all the other meetings I've heard, Hyannis is the gold standard that we look to. But again, I can't verify this, and I haven't looked online. But it was stated that they are having issues with their O&M vendor, and they have lawsuits with them because of the chemicals in their water. Now, is it a minor issue? Is it major? I'm not really sure if any chemicals in your water is a good thing. So I don't know where on the spectrum that a topic like that would fall, but I think that's worth looking into. I don't know if the town's confirmed that, and I don't know if they've looked into that. That's an important question. And, I actually ran into somebody, is it Mark Culling? out there, who sent a correspondence to AdCom. I'd never met him before, but he introduced himself. And I said, oh, I saw your correspondence on stewardship, and I think that's a really important topic. But there's nothing to stop the town from continuing to be a steward for our water sources. And I think that's an important topic, but there are a lot of concerns that I think can be brought up about this purchase. And so I think to solely make a purchase decision on that one issue is really, I just think is risky, because I think there's just a lot of things that we have not received facts on. They've been estimates. We're going to reevaluate. We're not sure about this. And I mean, say what you want about DPU, but they, from what we heard, they seem to put Aquarion's feet to the fire, and I don't have a problem with that if they're going to be tough on them and they're going to keep them honest and make sure they don't charge us anything more than they're entitled to. And it may not be a perfect system, but it's a system, and we won't have any of that oversight when the town buys the water company. And you know, the topic of intermunicipal agreements and memos of understanding, you know, that was brought up by the subcommittee early in the game, and it was difficult for me to get an answer at that meeting. And I will just say, personally, as a 9-year veteran and volunteer to the town, I mean, I've seen that happen to other people, but I was thoroughly disappointed that I couldn't get straight answers on questions. And this wasn't during the open period. This was it was on the agenda, and it was a subcommittee asking questions. And that worries me that that's how this process would go if the town purchased the water company. But that losing my place in my notes now, because I got fired up about that situation. But and so let me see here. Give me a second. Oh, the IMOs, or the IAs and the MOUs. So, you know, I had to really push to get an answer on that question, and then the ultimate answer was no, we're not going to do that. Now we're hearing, well, we're going to reevaluate that during, you know, after the purchase. Yeah, we might do that. I mean, that's a huge issue when you have 38% of your ratepayers that aren't in Hingham. And so that's just another issue that now we're going to look at after the purchase. I mean, how many of these issues that are key are we going to look at after the purchase? And so, and I also understand there aren't any agreements yet with ratepayers that are available. Again, should be done and addressed before the purchase. So I had notes here about bringing up my referendum issue again, but Eric covered that, so I will let his words as attorney speak on that. And so I'm on to my conclusions. I'm sure you're all happy about that. Are you eating your snacks, Evan? Are you keeping? Daveline did. She was in charge of them tonight. But anyway, so, you know, and I will just say, and take the high road on this, that, you know, we all know that people show their true colors online. So, and if they have agenda, you find it. I will just say that a difference of opinion on this subject should not equal disrespect. And there's no place in this or any discussion like this for that kind of discourse. I mean, reasonable minds should be able to disagree and be treated respectfully. And that's what I would just ask for people to continue to do in this debate. And, you know, any one of the things I mentioned or a combination of the things, I mean, there are a lot of things that haven't been looked at. I mean, we're in a race to get these warrant articles. It's supposed to be at the printer on Friday. We don't even have a draft that incorporates all of all our comments to be able to look at tonight. I'm going to race home and have to do that tonight. I mean, this is feeling really rushed, and I know personally I'm not comfortable with that, but ultimately, you know, you and the citizens will have to make that judgment for yourself. But, and, you know, I think that the fact that none of the people that have been studying this issue for the town are utility experts, are water system experts, it just feels, like we'll look at these issues when they arise, we'll look at it later, and it's almost like sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and I worry about that. I guess, I just need to make it clear that I spent a lot of time putting this stuff together today and the last couple days. These are coming from me, they're coming from my heart, they're coming from my head, these are my opinions. They are not, there is no influence from anybody else. And I just ask you all to look also within, when you make your judgments. And, I have one thing I said at the subcommittee meeting last week that I said, geez, I wish I could take that back, because it was a very poor choice of words. And what I said was that the decision of the subcommittee or AgCom didn't really matter. What I meant, it was a very poor choice of words, and what I meant was, people are either decided on this issue or they're undecided. And if they're decided, there's nothing that we're going to say that's going to change their mind. So as I said last Wednesday, and I reiterate again tonight, I feel as though the town's made the call for themselves as to the feasibility and advisability, and it's our job to do that for ourselves. I don't feel that anybody but you and your family should decide who is going to run your water company and provide you with clean, safe water. That's your decision. You have to weigh all these factors and weigh if you have concerns about any of these things that haven't been contemplated yet and that will be looked at after the purchase. That's what I meant by it. It was a poor choice of words, but it was saying that it's your call to make, and I am not going to say that yes to something that is not my choice and decision to make for you. So I think that's the crux of those are the highlights
Thank you,
of my
Libby.
comments.
Thank you, Libby. Other perspectives? Other observations? Other discussion?
Well, and Libby, I agree with you entirely that no one should feel that, I think anyone on the advisory committee is in the pocket, as it were, of any particular group. So I'm sorry that you've felt that way. On the substance, I do feel the acquisition's in the best interest of the town. My view is that the financial picture in light of Dave's analysis is good. The numbers work, perhaps not as well as the town's projections show, and I agree with you. I'm not convinced that the contract operator number will come in where the town's saying it will. But unanticipated things do turn up. However, it's also possible the numbers will be better than the town's projecting, because the projections are conservative, and Dave's analysis showed that there is a lot of room for play in a number of those variables that were, that we've been discussing. So, yeah, I'm concerned about the number on the contract operator, but I don't think that kills the financial outlook. And then, after the acquisition debt is paid off, the numbers will be very good. So, from a financial standpoint, I think this works. And as Dave noted at one of our meetings, I guess maybe it was at the advisory committee, subcommittee meeting last week, the town must be getting a good price, or Aquarian wouldn't be fighting as hard as it is to prevent this from happening. So, going ahead to a lot of your points, what are we giving up and what are we getting for what I see as financial savings? In the short term, we're giving up an experienced operator, a respected company. In recent years, my feel is that many of the prior issues have been somewhat mitigated, ameliorated. There have been times, though, in the past when that's not been the case. One, the cynic might say that perhaps the ongoing threat of the takeover is what's put the company on better behavior. I don't know. Maybe there's been a change in management or not. But there have been times when the relationship's not been good, and I think before 2012, that was one of those periods. And I think that, perhaps the South Hingham issue that you raised was relevant to some people's thinking, but I think also just the general relationship with the company was cause to look into the feasibility of the town exercising its rights. And going back further, before the water treatment plant was built, the company wasn't Aquarian, but the water company was not keeping the water safe, right? There's the potential under current ownership for there to be changes in the future. So yes, right now, the relationship perhaps, and some people may disagree with me. We've heard sort of areas of tension between the town and the water company. But, granted, the people who we deal with, I found everyone very pleasant in our discussions, perhaps with the CAO's exception. But the people who came to the subcommittee meetings, very pleasant. Most people in town, I think, also probably feel that the water currently is fine, and perhaps are saying, well, why is the town doing this? They're sort of fearful of a change. But, again, there's not always been a good relationship. There have been complaints in the past about Aquarian water. We've received materials from Ms. Rowe, which did lay out those issues with Veolia. There was also material in there about complaints about Aquarian going back a number of years. So the private versus public ownership doesn't seem to guarantee that they're one way or the other, that there won't be complaints of some sort. So we'd be avoiding, what would we be getting? We'd be getting control of our own system, right? We'd be getting control of our own resource. We'd be avoiding the need for frequent changes in a corporate owner. We'd be getting the ability to redeploy capital from the shareholders to the system to repair and maintenance. There'd be a more transparent process. You did point out in your remarks that perhaps town government can be more transparent or cooperative with its citizens. I'm sure that's true in everywhere, but at least there is a process. It's a process where you can come to town hall, attend meetings, you can complain, and maybe you have the wrong people in and you get the brushed off, but there's the opportunity to change the leadership. You don't have that with the private ownership. You may not even know what's going on. Mentioned areas of, some people think that there's tension. Well, we did hear a lot about the road program, the coordination with the road program, and it does seem you're not going to eliminate the need to open roads that have been repaved. It's always going to be some emergency, something's going to happen, but the expectation is that if you're dealing with yourself, it's going to get better. The protection of the watershed, we did get, I guess anyone who's on the Aquarian mailing list received today their newsletter, which touted their protections of the watershed. I sort of wonder why that suddenly came up. After we've had, these discussions, if the town has expended significant CPA funds over the last number of years to protect the watershed. And we would be eligible as a municipal water system to get state grants. Aquarian, has chosen not to do that. So does that suggest that maybe the town should take control of the resource? We would be taking on responsibilities, yes, as you pointed out. The costs would be borne by the ratepayers, not by the taxpayers. And as you noted, DEP would continue to have oversight, so the safety of the water is continuing. I think that the towns, there is a lot of fear when there's change, particularly when you see a lot of things in the news about, hey, water systems break down or what have you. There are other experienced operators out there, and the town would learn in a short time, I think, what it needs to know if it chooses to take over the operation of the system. The town runs another utility, well, it runs two. It runs the sewer and it runs the light plant. Hingham Light Plant, I'd put up against Eversource any day in terms of the service it gives to the residents of Hingham. In terms of the relationship with Hull and Cohasset, I think that's overblown. I guess if I'm a resident of Hull, I might have some questions about, well, what's this new owner? There could be a new corporate owner, too. What is my relationship with the new owner? And, maybe I like the way things are now, and there's going to be some change with these people coming in. I think Aquarian's done a good job of riling people up. I think that goes to some of the concerns. But I think once the operation is underway under town ownership, they're ratepayers. They're going to be treated the same. Their rates will be the same. Repairs to the hull portion of the system, it makes sense for the owner, in whether it's the private owner or Hingham, to put in resources where there's a need for them. And if that's in Hull, I think that would be done. We've heard from, granted, not on the same scale, but we've heard Hingham serves Cohasset, portion of Cohasset in sewer, and that there's no issue there. There are other communities that do this, and again, not 38% of the system, but we don't have any reports of there being major problems or things falling apart or people in the served town revolting against the people in the serving town. I mean, I just think that that's something that's been, trumped up and is not a real concern. But coming back to your original or your concluding remarks, though, I certainly respect that you're coming from a different point of view. But I think that this is in the town's best interest, and that in the long run, it would be a benefit to the town.
And I just want to say two quick things is, the
Sure.
town's not going to lose this option to purchase. I mean, this is still going to be in there in the charter. So just because if we're not ready for this town meeting does not mean that we can't get ourselves ready and dot i's and cross t's and look at this next year. But for right now, it feels like there's a rush. And your comment about DEP. DEP just will regulate the testing, but they're not, that process, yes, they'll regulate it, but someone else is going to be responsible to do the work to make sure we're in compliance. So it won't be,
Okay.
it'll be whoever the O&M vendor is.
Okay,
That's all.
well, sure. No, well, just two quick responses. I think one of the concerns about waiting is that the price keeps going up, and people have sort of blanched at 112, and as you say, 100. When you throw in the interest, 176 or whatever, it's 107. Okay,
What's a million between friends?
that over 30 years, that price keeps going up. So maybe there would be something to be said for studying some things more. Although the Acquisition Study Committee and the Selectmen have done a lot of study, but I think the big reason not to do waiting is the price keeps going up. In terms of oversight of the actual testing, we will have a water superintendent. So it's not only in the hands of the O&M vendor. There will be town oversight.
Additional perspectives, Evan?
So, there's been lots of detail and facts and figures. I just wanted to say a few things. I'd like to thank our neighbors from 1879 for providing us the opportunity we have to debate this, because it's kind of pretty cool if you think about it in the grand scheme of things. Coming into this, I can honestly tell you I didn't have I wasn't predisposed to buy the water company or not buy the water company. I've been served by Aquarian for the 18 years I've lived in town. They've done a nice job. But if you take a look and step back, we can never de-risk everything. I think that our colleagues and all the work that you folks have put in, and the selectmen and the study committee have done a great job at looking at the potential financial impacts. And I agree with Victor's comments that, you know, you could go up a little bit, you could go down a little bit, and there is some unknown in there. But if you look out for the next 50 to 75 years, water will be one of our kind of scarcest commodities, right? It's not going to get less expensive. So for us as a community to make a choice now to potentially have control over the source of the water for the citizens of our communities, I think it's an important step. And if you think about, you know, folks sitting here in 2119 debating what we've just kind of talked about as a deliberative body and the
Just add 100 years to all of our ages.
I did. And I think maybe the town docks will be right here where we park the municipal vehicles. I hope that our fellow neighbors and citizens in the future appreciate the decisions that we potentially have made in this current year. So there was one fact and figure that I think Mr. Walsh, and I appreciate actually the folks from Aquarian coming down and presenting, and I also agree, outside of the CEO's comments, coming down to Maybury and explaining to us, you know, how they could do it better. I've appreciated everybody else's comments. I think that the fact that sticks in my head is they have 3,000 miles of main to maintain, and I could be wrong. Maybe they can correct me if I'm not. And there's about 172 here in this system. And so this gives us the opportunity to kind of maintain these and pick and choose, you know, what gets done. I appreciate all the comments from the folks from Hull. My only thought coming out of Monday's meeting was I heard things like Flint, Michigan, and taxation without representation. I think we threw kids in there too. In a world where we are hyperbolizing everything, I hope they would know that as their neighbors, if there was an issue with the water supply, they could contact their selectmen to contact our selectmen and potentially get it resolved. Where right now they end up going into a customer service line at Eversource. So I think about this in terms of looking at the long game, and I think the opportunity to own this source and control it as citizens in the town, I think is an important step. I don't minimize anyone's feelings on both sides of it, and I have truly appreciated our committee's kind of, you can disagree without being disagreeable, and I've appreciated all the comments and concerns that people have, but I do think that I want folks to understand my perspective as I came in with no real, you know, pre-drawn conclusion that I think it's an opportunity for us to do something important for the future of the town. And so I hope that, you know, people can respect that, and, you know, I'll leave the facts. There's going to be risk. You can't de-risk it. And there's going to be things we're going to have to figure out. But there's a bunch of smart people in this room that I think can kind of help us get to the right answers. So.
Additional perspectives? Nancy?
So I will say that I came into this very skeptical of whether this was the correct thing to do for the town. I came at it from a perspective a little bit as Mr. Shafter talked to us about the other night of when you calculate it down and where are the savings. But as I have taken on all the information that our very learned colleagues have taken the time to dissect for us, I've come to the opinion that those dollars and cents make a lot of sense to bring back under town control. And I've been totally convinced that financially this is absolutely the right thing for Hingham to do. But I also stood back and looked at it from a citizen, as a consumer of water, and as someone who is very concerned, as I think Evan spoke eloquently about, of what water means to us going forward. And I thought back on other things that I have felt passionately about in town. And one of them, oddly, was the Lerner property, which I was also very skeptical about when the town proposed to buy that. My initial reaction was, we're basically saving the property values of 14 abutting neighbors. And as I dwelled in and really dove into that topic and realized what we were really protecting was not the abutters, but we were protecting the entire watershed and all of the wells that are down on Free Street, which is where a lot of the water that comes from my neighborhood and goes into Hingham, that we were protecting those water sources. And that was a very, very well thought out acquisition by the town. There were very passionate people that were involved in that. And I think that that same passion came to this. And I think that this is a continuation of our protection of that resource. I have no qualms about our ability to govern a water company. I would put up the Hingham Municipal Power and Light against any lighting company on the South Shore. I have lots of neighbors who have spent time in hotel rooms, and in the 20 years that Mike and I have been in town here, if we've lost power for more than 3 hours at a time, I think I might be exaggerating. So I have no reason to believe that we as a town could not do an equal job. So I would say is coming in very skeptical. I've been very impressed. I've been impressed with the articles that have been put forward and the amount of research and the amount of data that supports the decisions.
We want to have additional conversation?
So I'll just offer my 2 cents. As part of my responsibility to the town as a member of the advisory committee, I have felt that it was important to attend or watch the various public meetings held on the subject. Like Nancy, I had no preconceived notion when I started this process or when we started this process. But I have watched the forums hosted by the town and Aquarian. I have also reviewed and analyzed many of the documents on file on the town website. Overall, I've been impressed by the diligence of the members of the Water Company Study Committee and the town officials to objectively evaluate the issues involved in this complex matter. In particular, I felt that both the committee and the town responded to evolving and new information in a manner that supported their goal to be fair and objective throughout the process. I have likewise been impressed with the work of the Advisory Committee subcommittee to conduct a fair and objective review of the facts and information presented by both sides. Finally, I have been struck by the outpouring of comments and information presented on both sides of this discussion by members of the public. In the final analysis, I am supporting the recommendation that the town purchase the water company for the following reasons. The transaction makes sense from an economic standpoint. The governance and operations models outlined by the town are logical and appropriate. The town has also indicated a willingness to evaluate these models in the future and in response to evolving situations. The capital expenditure plan outlined by the town will ensure that the aging mains are replaced in a timely manner and on a consistent basis. Replacing the aging mains will reduce the need for emergency repairs, improve the overall operation of the system, and help to reduce unaccounted for water. Local control will provide greater transparency to all ratepayers due to state open meeting statutes in overall water company operations, including rate setting and matters such as main replacement coordination with road paving. And finally, and most importantly, local control will enable the town to protect the water supply and ensure its viability into the future. While the town has historically purchased land to protect the water supply, this action will further support its actions in this very important area. Protection of the water supply is a critical issue for us and for future generations, and is, in my opinion, the overriding reason the town should go forward with this purchase. Finally, Aquarian is, I'm sure, a fine company, and nothing in my remarks is meant to disparage them. However, the priorities of the town and Aquarian are different given the nature of their purpose. Water is a critical resource, and the integrity and quality of it cannot be compromised, which is why ownership of the water supply must reside in the hands of the people who depend on it and use it on a daily basis.
We want to have additional general discussion before we are ready to vote. And before we vote, we will go around the room and see if anyone wants to make an additional observation. Daveline?
I just have a comment to make about both Aquarian and Eversource. As someone who was somewhat neutral on this, and I just say somewhat because I tend to not be a person who's in favor of for-profit monopolies as a general rule, but in terms of this process, my thought has been what's the best interest of the town. And having followed our session on Monday, I spent some time actually on the website for both Aquarian Water of Massachusetts and Eversource. And that helped me understand, because one of the things I haven't quite understood is the extent to which Aquarian has engaged in a process of fighting this right that the town has. And so one of the things that finally hit me, and it should have probably hit me a long time, several months ago or weeks ago at least, is Aquarian has, according to their website, approximately 19,800 homes in which they homes and businesses for which they provide service. We're somewhere in the neighborhood of 13,000 of those, and suddenly it was like a light bulb went off. Well, why are they? We're about almost 70% of their business. And so that doesn't, doesn't mean one thing or the other, but clearly this is a good investment, and the investment is better if they have Hingham than if they do not, or if they have Service Area A. Then I looked at Eversource's 2017 annual report, which is their most recent report that's on their website. And this is what it says in their annual report. Our total return to shareholders, the combination of dividends paid and share price appreciation, was 18% for 2017, far exceeding the 11.7% return for the industry. This was the 8th time in the last 9 years that we have achieved a double-digit total return for our shareholders. Only 2 other companies within our sector can match this consistent level of achievement. Of course, that helps explain Eversource's role here. And then the report also said, and with the addition of the Aquarian Water Company, we've entered a new business line with many growth opportunities, becoming the only U.S. electric utility to also own a water utility. And for all the reasons that have been said, I think water is going to increasingly become a precious resource, and probably owning other kinds of things, particularly that relate to fossil fuel, will not be. So I just found that to be really interesting from that perspective. The other thing I wanted to say, because I've thought a lot about this question of are we moving too fast, and I appreciate how the Water Subcommittee in particular, because you all have gone to a lot of meetings and you've done a tremendous amount of work. And I actually wanted to sort of figure out what that number was. So if my count is right, and it might not be, but since January, between the Water Study Acquisition Committee and this subcommittee of advisory, and then adding our own meetings, leaving out the Board of Selectmen, there have been 19 public meetings regarding this issue. And many of those meetings have gone on for a long time. So, as this one is intended, is apparently going to do as well. So there's been a lot of discussion about this, and one of the things, though, that strikes me in this process, some of the things have changed. So I've listened to our fellow citizens in Hull's concern, and now we have a proposal for a Citizens Advisory Board that will include someone from Hull and someone from Cohasset. The Board of Selectmen, I think, is it tomorrow night you're going there? Or so is going to meet there. The elected officials and the managers, it appears, in Cohasset and Hull both support this. So there's clearly a lot of cooperation, but I think people have also been heard in this process. So it's not just that it's transparent in that we are required to comply with the open meeting law. It's actually people have let their ears work, and that has resulted in changes. And I think that bodes well for the future. because why would we suddenly stop listening to anyone? And if, as a new member on AdCom this year, I mean, I'm amazed at this budget process, and I don't think we've ever asked anyone, now, where are you from? What, you know, we ask their address, but I can't imagine in that process if somebody comes to a budget hearing on a water company budget would suddenly be said, well, no, you're from Hull, you can't speak. In fact, a lot of people from Hull have spoken at these meetings, and so I think that bodes well for the future. That's all.
Andy?
There's some thing about, it's somewhat intuitive about the private ownership of water that is troublesome to me. We own the water and we buy it at a profit from this company. On its face, it doesn't strike me as a great model. Water is probably the most precious national resource in our town, in our world. We all need it. 70% of the globe is covered by water. Without water, there's not life, of course. I mean, the importance of water cannot be overstated. And the notion that this commodity that no one can live without is sold at a profit troubles me, frankly. I'm drinking from a bottle of water that I bought at the store. That's probably a contradiction in terms, but you get my point that this is so basic that one has to ask, is this something that should be sold in the marketplace at a profit? So I sort of start with that, and then I sort of draw back from that large philosophical question to the more basic question, which is, okay, in my town, for my family, what do I have to say about the water supply? I have an opportunity to own it with my neighbors and control it. Do I prefer that model, my ownership of it, to a ownership by for-profit endeavor? That to me is a no-brainer as well. Why would I not want to own the water in my town? The other side of it, of course, is if I were a stockholder in a company that is guaranteed, in essence, a 10.5% return on assets, plus more than that with the leverage they can exert, I would say I would love to own water and be able to sell it at a profit. So I guess I understand the stockholder's view on the other side. I must add, however, it troubles me the ferocity of the fight over this asset, given the plain language of the statute that says the town shall have the right at any time to purchase the corporate property. I mean, the statute is a contract, if you will, between the Hingham Water Company that was first established and the townspeople of Hingham. And when the townspeople of Hingham exercise their right or seek to exercise their right under the contract, one wouldn't expect the party on the other side of the contract to fight so vigorously against my right under the contract. It troubles me that ratepayers have to finance the fight against this. There was a complaint last night that if the votes go through, the people of Hull would have to pay some share of Hingham's legal bills involved in this, yet they had no say in that. Well, of course, the Hingham's legal bills are but a fraction, I can assure you, of the legal bills of the water company, to say nothing of the $2.7 million spent in public relations, let us say, as to which, of course, nobody in Hull, Hingham, or Cohasset had any say. But we will all pay for that. To me, should be a fairly straightforward contractual matter. We, as a party to the contract, have a right, it's sort of like an option that we're exercising to purchase. And yet, there's been tremendous opposition. And frankly, I don't really see that as quite fair. Maybe that's naive to say that, but in any event. As to the merits, it seems to me that I have heard some very real, concrete, and to me indisputably advantageous reasons for the acquisition. The financial advantages of town ownership, to me, are indisputable. Likewise, I believe that under the current management, the infrastructure has not been maintained as it should be, and will be if we own it. I do think that we have been better stewards of this resource by protecting the watershed, given the acquisitions we have made, and something that the water company has not demonstrated interest in doing. Those are three quite easy, concrete, obvious advantages. There are no, at least to my hearing, no concrete, obvious disadvantages. As has been pointed out by Dave, nobody has come up and challenged the financial assumption or sensitivity analysis and said this is wrong. You people of Hingham will lose a lot of money on this. Nobody has said that the infrastructure work of the existing company has been perfect or close to perfect or can't be improved. And of course, it's obvious with regard to purchases protecting the watershed. But there could be other reasons, I suppose, not to do this, but they have to be concrete, tangible, demonstrable. There have been a lot of expressions of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. As human beings, we all have those. We all have fear. We all have uncertainties. We all have doubt. But one of the great things about representative democracy and almost real democracy, if you will, in a town, is that we collectively have to face and overcome those fears. I am a trial lawyer. I've tried a lot of jury cases, and they say a trial lawyer likes or doesn't like the jury system depending upon the results of his last case. And there's a lot of truth to that, but there's one thing about the jury system wholly apart from the wisdom of the crowd, and that is somewhat magical and all. But there's one thing about the jury system that is just wonderful, and it's simply this. Under our system of government, we say we'll take 10 of our people, essentially, or 12, if you say, 12 of our people, we'll pick them up off the street with no particular knowledge or expertise. We'll remove those who have a bias. And then no matter how difficult the legal issue is, we will trust them to decide it correctly. To me, that is one of the finest parts of our government structure because it expresses our belief in the fundamental worth, dignity, and ability of every human being. And I believe that is true in our town when we go to town meeting. It always impresses me how well thought out people's opinions are when they express them, how heartfelt people's views are, and the great wisdom that is shared. And I come home always thinking, it is true. There is great worth of value and dignity in every human being. And when you put these human beings together, they can do wonderful things. They don't have to be doing them in a corporate form. They can do it in a government form. So while I would deny human nature to deny that we have fears, concerns, and doubts, I'm I know we can face them, that we must face them, and that we will do a fine job on this, as we have demonstrated facing other problems. And if we can't, frankly, face the issue of governing something as important to us as water, then, you know, a lot of this other stuff probably doesn't matter much. You know, whether we can run a good country club probably is a lot less important. I think we can do this. I think there are good reasons to do it. I haven't heard any good, concrete, demonstrable reasons not to do it, and I'm not worried that we lack the competence to acquire and manage this properly. Thank you.
Would we like more general discussion? Yes, we would.
Either that or I can wait until we make statements, I think.
You really want to go after that?
I know.
Your choice.
You just stole my opening. Julie, go for it. That was very well said, Andy. Your thoughts on town meeting especially, and I agree with you and Daveline and Ed on making this decision at town meeting. We can do it, and we have the power of discussion at town meeting, and I think it's possible to make a decision there, a sound decision. I want to first thank all of the people who have worked on this issue for a long time, the citizen volunteers and all of the town employees. People have invested significant time and added their professional expertise over the years with the goal of making a good decision for the community. So thank you. While I think that there are many reasons to purchase the water company based on our discussions and watching testimony over all the various meetings, I have approached this issue at the outset, trying to look at it from all points of view. And I kept coming back to what I thought was critical, and that was our infrastructure. While we have heard from some who think that issues with infrastructure are reasons to avoid buying the water company, I tend to look at them more as reasons to take control of it. And through the experience while rebuilding roads and from Aquarion's own data, our communities have learned that needed replacement and investment into our water mains has been deferred or ignored for many years while Aquarion continues to pay its investors and hike its rates. To address the concerns of our neighbors in Hull and Cohasset, I think I have a unique point of view. I live in Hingham. I have for 20 years, but I'm not a ratepayer. There's no water piped to my neighborhood, so we use well water. But I live in Hull during the summer, and so I am a ratepayer from the town of Hull for my water. So I care very deeply about the needs of those who buy water in Hull, also North Cohasset, as well as Hingham. And as this water purchase is a purchase of the entire system affecting all three towns, people do have a right to be interested and concerned about the future. We should consider the cooperative ways our towns already work together, for example, on public safety dispatch and the sewer. And Libby, you went there with the road diet. Change is hard, but I think in that instance, the goal has always been the safety on a major roadway between our two towns. And I think, if you can sort of use that measure for water, the idea is that we're in this together. Select person Mary Power said at our hearing last week in terms of how our towns would address capital needs for water in the future. It's in our collective interest to fix the water mains that are in the greatest need of repair wherever they are. If they're leaking and breaking, we're all paying for that. And we're going to, as she said very nicely, we're all going to rise in this together. Based on the financial models which we have discussed, I think, it's shown that we could invest money into our system. So in summary, from the data provided by Aquarion, our towns have been left with water capital needs. We have water mains with an average age of 64 years, and they've been unaddressed properly for many years. And in its desperation to retain control over this water asset, Aquarian has spent millions of dollars, we've been told at least 2.7 million over the past 6 years, to influence our town meeting process, doing opposition research on the advisory committee and others, paying canvassers and trying to sway voters to vote against the acquisition. And I feel like they could have put that money towards capital infrastructure of the water system in our town, in Hingham, and Hull, and in North Cohasset, and I think that would have spoken louder to its customers than any PR campaign. Thank you.
Sure.
So, we've heard a lot, an awful lot of information over the past couple weeks, couple months in this process. And I have to say, I don't disagree with much of what we've heard. For example, I've been impressed by the kind of philosophical reasons why water ought to be under public ownership. I see a lot of value in that. I've been impressed by the environmental concerns about managing that resource. And we've heard an awful lot about the financial implications of this. I have to say, I'm not hung up at all about the finances. There are some question marks there. There's some uncertainty there that does give me some reservations. But on the balance, I think the money works, and it may not be a coincidence that of the 14 members of the advisory committee, 3 members of the Board of Selectmen, and 5 members of the Water Acquisition Study Committee who are going to vote on this, I'm far and away the youngest. I'm still going to be a young man, in my mind, 30 years from now. Still going to be living here, and if this goes through, 30 years from now, my bill's going to decrease by 60%, what...
Should we be insulted?
I don't. Oh, no reflection on anybody else.
Taking bets on who's going to be around?
Oh, my. What troubles me about this proposal is what I haven't heard, and that's a lot of detail focused around 2 things. One is how the thing's going to be run on the back end. The other is what I'll call the Hull angle. But before I say a few things about each of those, Andy, you spoke a moment ago about reasons, concrete disadvantages and advantages and so on. I had a similar thought earlier today as I was on my way home about burden of proof and where the burden of proof, that's another trial lawyer concept, where the burden of proof ought to be on this. And it seems to me, in my view, that we have a water system right now that generally does the job well. It certainly has warts. There are things that we would like to be better, but it generally does the job well. And what that tells me is that it's not the burden of proof to find concrete reasons to oppose this. Rather, the burden of proof is to be absolutely certain that things are going to work out if the town purchases this, because it's a very complicated widget, and it's not the sort of thing that you want to take risks and chances with. So to that end, the lack of detail, one thing that I've been troubled by is the lack of detail about how it's going to be run on the back end. I haven't seen a timeline for the transition. I actually reread Mr. Norman's very helpful, very influential submission on the boat home the past couple of nights, and I noticed a line in his November 13th, 2018 letter. Obviously, a lot of his concerns have been addressed through this process, and that's a good thing. But I noticed something in there, I'm quoting, "In no event should the town schedule a vote on the purchase until there is a final operating agreement negotiated with a competent O&M vendor that is available for review and comment by town voters." That spoke to me. It makes a lot of sense because I think the detail is very important. Similarly, we heard from a gentleman on Monday night. He introduced himself as Ben Bastianelli, a member of the Pembroke Board of Water Commissioners, and I looked him up afterwards to kind of verify his background. His view was that what we've heard is a good start, and we're off in the right direction, but it scratches the surface, and that we are moving way too fast for our own good. And one of the things about Mr. Bastianelli's comments that spoke to me was he was just about the only person, maybe the only person, who's spoken up and commented, certainly at the meeting Monday night, who doesn't really have a preconceived notion of this. And so I took what he said quite seriously. And similarly, Libby, you mentioned a moment ago the concept of knowing what you don't know. And that's something that concerns me about this. We don't really have a clear idea what this is going to look like on the back end. My concerns about the hull angle are very similar. The hull angle, in my view, is what's really unique about our system. You know, there's plenty of water utilities out there. There's plenty of municipally owned water utilities out there. No doubt that municipalities do a fine job running water utilities. No doubt that Hingham would do a fine job running a water utility. The Hull thing is unique. It's unique in the state of Massachusetts. It's unprecedented in the state of Massachusetts. And that's not to say that it's insurmountable. You know, Vic, you said a moment ago that you think that the Hull angle is overblown and not a real concern. I happen to think that it's not overblown and is a real concern. But what's more important, my concern is one level deeper, that we don't know. I can think, you can think, but so far as I know, and I asked this very question on Monday night, no consideration has been given to the pros and cons of the different ways that this system could be governed and run to take account of the fact that nearly half of our customer base would be out of town, what that means, what its implications are for our town and for the governance of this thing, and whether municipal, maybe public, maybe intermunicipal, maybe water district, who knows what public ownership of this thing would serve the goals of this purchase. The analysis just hasn't been devoted to that, and that troubles me, in part because it's not the bargain that town meeting agreed to back in 2012 when this process started. I went back to the warrant from 2012 and read it. 2012, of course, is when the money was appropriated for a feasibility study, and the advisory committee's comment on that article back in 2012 spoke about the need to consider potential issues associated with purchasing the water utility. It noted that potentially in contrast to the regional dispatch center and some other services that we have right now, that regionalization of a regulated utility would most likely be more complicated than that. The pitch for the feasibility study back in 2012 was money to hire experts to make recommendations on areas including management. And the bullet points that the 2012 comment identified under management are organization, governance, particularly as it relates to communities currently serviced by the water company, and how the town should manage and operate the company. Neither of those things have been analyzed to the point that we really know what we're getting. We're going to set up a transition committee. They'll study it further, but in my view, the time to study it and arrive at certainty and confidence about what we're getting into is before the purchase, not after it. And so, I'll wrap up by saying that, again, I see very valid, very good reasons to buy the water utility. And I'm not saying that I'm opposed in the abstract or in concept to the town purchasing the water utility. What I am saying is that I'm not persuaded that the proposal that's been put forward this year is sufficiently engaged in the details to give me confidence to recommend that we ought to do it at this time in this way. There's certainly a dollars and cents cost to waiting a year or 2 years, who knows, longer. But in my view, the dollars and cents cost is worth the measure of certainty and confidence that I'd like to achieve before saying yes to this, and that I haven't yet been able to achieve based on what we have not heard. And I'd also observe that, and I think Libby made the same point earlier, that the right to purchase this utility never goes away. It's always going to be there in the statute as part of that contract. There's value just to having it there in the way of leverage over the private owner. But in any event, because that option is always going to be there, in my view, it's not something that requires us to accept any level of uncertainty on before we say yes. And that's my chief reason for planning to vote no on Article M.
Thank you, Eric. We've heard from members on a variety of kinds of issues and perspectives, and it's 9:30, and we have other articles to continue to consider, but I think this is the meat of the matter. Does the committee want to have additional discussion, or are we ready to?
Are you still going to go around the table?
I am, and anybody who who feels they have already made their point will pass. Are we close enough to voting that I should take us around the table?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Libby suggested that we do the subcommittee first, and I thought that.
I think for the discussion, that made sense, but you do it for the vote, do it anyway.
Okay, then we'll
It
just go
doesn't-
around the table. And I warned Bob Curley that I didn't want to throw our rookies under the bus by making them go first. So I warned him that he had to go first. And we'll go clockwise. Mr. Curley.
Well, colleagues, fellow townspeople, and neighbors, I actually hope to be here 30 years from now, and I'm going to do my best. And oh, thank you. And I do have grandchildren in the town, and I'm thinking about them and their contemporaries. People have said this is a generational vote, and I'm thinking about those young people that are running around in our backyards. And this is our water, and there's nothing more precious than our water. So I came at this from trying to reach the best judgment I could reach in terms of making a recommendation to my fellow townspeople about what to do at a town meeting. And I'll digress a minute on burden of proof. Like Andy, I'm a trial lawyer, and I'm respectfully going to disagree with Eric. In the law, we have three burdens of proof. One is a preponderance of the evidence. Two is by clear and convincing evidence. And three is beyond a reasonable doubt. And there is no burden of proof in making judgments on any matters in the law that demands absolute certainty. And if that were the standard, we'd have analysis paralysis forever. From my review of the facts, I believe there has not only been clear and convincing evidence that we should buy the water company, but there is evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that we should do that. And one of the things that I look at as a trial lawyer, and that juries are encouraged to look at, is what is the source of the information you're receiving, and how do you weigh that information in view of the source? And I would like to thank the Water Study Acquisition, I always get the name wrong, the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee, and its members, because I don't think there are any finer citizens and better citizens in the town of Hingham to make that recommendation based on the years of study that they've done. I've been enormously impressed by the depth of their inquiry and the fact that they started out looking to see if there was a showstopper. Was there something that was really going to stand in the way of the town thinking about buying the water company? There's operational engineering water company expertise. There's legal and governance expertise. And John Asher and Ed Siegfried, ought to get an Oscar for best economic analysis over the years. I think, John, you've got every number memorized, and if you don't, Ed does. And turning to the financial question, my feeling is that the town and this committee, subcommittee, looked at that from two directions, looked at it in depth, and that looking at it from both directions, that it leads me to the conclusion that it makes financial sense. The town had a sophisticated model that was double-checked by an outside qualified consultant, showing that there was going to be substantial savings. And nobody disputes that after 30 years, and I'll take Eric out for a beer at that point, that there's going to be a very, very substantial savings to my grandchildren, at least. And Dave Anderson, who is the runner-up for the Oscar on financial analysis, looked at this from the other direction. He took Aquarion's model and he sensitivity tested it. He went through a lot of what-ifs, and under all of the likely scenarios, and nobody has a crystal ball, the town was going to save substantial dollars. I think conservative assumptions were made with respect to the numbers, and I expect that there is probably a decent probability that the savings will actually be greater than what has been projected. I've heard the number $250 million, and I think people get there by not only adding in the the acquisition costs, but all kinds of future costs, including the debt payments. Well, it reminds me of going to a closing when you're buying a house. So you're going to buy the house for $1 million, and you get the disclosure from the bank about how much interest you're going to pay over 30 years. And you feel like you're buying the house twice. But in this case, this is a great house to buy because we're buying it with ratepayers' money that is going to be paid anyway. Maybe I probably don't need to say that again to this crowd, but really, the money that is going to be used to acquire our water company is money that is probably less than what ratepayers would pay if Aquarion continued to operate the company. And we're going to end up owning the house. I think financially, at least in my mind, there is no question that it makes sense. In terms of governance, I do think there's been an attempt to sow fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And we are joining 96% of other municipal communities in this Commonwealth who run their own water companies. And they have water superintendents that move. They have water superintendents that die. They have water superintendents that go, and retire. And they're replaced. They're hired. And I don't see where the impediment is to us hiring a qualified water superintendent who is going to be licensed with the expertise to run a town water system. I've heard people say, well, Aquarian has expertise. Well, what's going to be hired is the same expertise that Aquarian has, properly licensed people. We already have a superintendent of public works that has those licenses and could run the water company tomorrow. I sometimes think when people say that the Board of Selectmen can't run a water company, that they have the picture of Karen Anderson passing a bag of chlorine to Mary Power, who gives it to Paul Healy to dump in a vat. And that's not what that's not what they do. They hire properly licensed people. And I also want to say that the selectmen have expressed a preference for hiring an operator who is going to retain employees who are already at the water treatment plant and working on the water system. So those people that have experience are going to get their veterans preference. And they're just, it seems beyond belief that the idea that somehow Hingham couldn't run this water company should be a showstopper. It is not. In terms of operation and stewardship, I think those are very important concepts. And like Dave, who kind of started the evening, I was somewhat astounded when Aquarian's president came here the other evening and told us that investment in water company infrastructure was the most important concept in the business, because from what I've seen, Aquarian's efforts at main replacement, in trying to coordinate efforts with the town of Hingham to minimize road repairs and costs to us as taxpayers, is poor. The unaccounted for water issue, where basically all the water that is pumped out of a Cord Pond every year, is very significant. It's way above I shouldn't say way above, it's above the appropriate standards. And I was very impressed with the model of Hyannis that took over its privately operated water company, started operating itself, and got its unaccounted for water down to an incredible level of 6%. So in terms of stewardship, I think the town is going to be a much better steward of our water. There's always risk. I've heard people talk about risk, and to my mind, I mean, a lot of risk is covered by insurance contracts and by indemnity and insurance with the operator. I don't think any qualified operator is going to do anything other than deliver quality water. I think analogies to places like Flint, are, again, an attempt to sow fear, uncertainty, and doubt that don't have any realistic comparison to Hingham. With respect to Hull, if I were a resident of Hull, I would much rather have my water company dealt with by my neighbors than by a foreign corporation that is reporting to shareholders in terms of profit and which has historically underinvested in Hull water infrastructure. You know, they can come right up the road, they'll have a member on the Citizens Advisory Board, they'll have immediate access, and I think they're much better off with local governance. And as we'll all see and people know in some of the later articles, the town is prepared to study how to govern the water system in years going forward. So that remains to be seen. What are we going to get? We're going to get the water treatment plant. We're going to get Accord Pond. We're going to get Fulling Mill Pond, also known affectionately as the Duck Pond. And in terms of us versus a private monopoly for a public resource, I think it's much better off that it's the town that operates the water system. The CPC has spent almost $9 million, or more than $9 million, to acquire over 133 acres of land to protect the watershed. I remember when I was CPC chair, I was working with Charlie Berry on the acquisition of the Accord Pond parcel, which has Accord Brook run through it. And we were working with a wonderful conservation at the officer for the town at the time named Cliff Prentice. And Cliff said to us, with respect to water, you don't control it unless you own it. And I think it's time for us to own it. So I'm going to vote for it.
Thank you, Bob. As we continue, and Bob was on the subcommittee and hadn't already spoken, I'd just like to remind everybody that we're offering brief comments. And if you have, and if you have already offered the bulk of your comments, you might summarize them very quickly or pass because you've already been heard. Eric.
I don't have anything to add to what I said earlier.
Dave.
All right, I won't go quickly because people have already heard from me tonight. Let me just touch on a couple points. I will say that in my review of the town's multi-year effort, it's clear that the town approached this effort thoughtfully, methodically, and thoroughly. The Water Company Acquisition Study Committee in particular, and not to suggest anyone else did otherwise, but that committee did not seek data to support a conclusion. They reached a conclusion based on the data. Aquarian did not and does not use this process. They are clinging to a profitable asset and have spent and likely will spend considerable more resources to sway public opinion to support this objective. The profit motives of Aquarian are clear. As I said the other night, that is not intended as a pejorative statement, that is a fact. I think the motives of the town are clear as well, and that is the best interest of the town and its citizens. I respect anyone's right to disagree with the reasoned conclusion of the town and its committees and its advisors that they've reached over many, many years. But I believe that disagreement has to be based on facts. There are volumes of information available to help everyone reach their own conclusion. Based on my review of the process that the town has undertaken, I am confident saying that if you don't have time to review all of the available information, and there is a lot of it, you can be comfortable trusting the work the town and its advisors have done to date and the conclusion that they have reached. I know I am. I will vote for the water company acquisition and for Article MM.
I don't have anything to add.
Evan?
Well, I'd like to keep us here all night, so I've got 2 or 3 pages I'll run through. I'm glad I went close to the beginning after Libby because there were so many eloquent points made. I stand by what I said. I appreciate all the deliberation, and I think of people in 1879 by gas lamps or whatever they did this by on parchment paper, writing this stuff down, and I'm glad they did because it's provided an interesting deliberation for us in this last couple weeks. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Andy?
I have one very brief point to add. The point has been made that our ability to purchase the water company at any time can be used by the town as leverage to compel the water company to do more of what we may want by way of infrastructure, et cetera. I am firmly of the view that we have worked so hard to get to this point. So many people have invested so much time and effort that if the town doesn't buy the water company now, there will be no leverage in the future. So I think leverage for the future is not an issue.
Nancy?
I would say that based on the fact that this is not going to cost the taxpayers, does not slow down any of our other requirements in town for capital expenditures and other projects that we have going on, my complete confidence in our ability to govern this and the importance of our watershed, I vote for MM.
You would vote for. Ed?
I came in pretty much as a blank slate, and it became very clear to me very early on that it made good financial sense. I mean, just by virtue of the structural elements. You can tweak this model or that model, but they all come out in favor of the town, so I came to that pretty quickly. I'll just make, so I'm in favor of this article, but I'll just make three, I think, additional points. Ever since you said we're going to have to talk tonight, I've been thinking about this. Let me first address, I think, the points that Libby and Eric so eloquently made about the areas that we don't have worked out. And I think those are all accurate, and I think they're all viable areas for concern. I believe, however, that the big pieces are figured out. I mean, the financing is figured out, and all of the issues that are going to be reflected in the next three articles. The governance structure is figured out, and that's the biggie. They've also figured out, they've also laid out how they're going to address the other large issues. So I think many of the things that Eric and Libby have laid out, not all of them, but many of them will be handled during the good husbandry period. I mean, we're not going to be responsible for those uncompleted tasks on day one. We've got time, and I'm confident that what is in place now is sufficient for us to move forward. I think the work that we have not done does not mitigate against taking the vote now. Secondly, I got to thinking about the town of Hingham, and it became apparent to me that Hingham does not think in terms of years or even decades. They think in terms of generations. And Hingham is unique in that regard. And Bob, I think you anticipated a point I wanted to make, and I thought, what do I want to turn over to my children and my grandchildren? And I use the lighting plant as kind of an example that the town has run and owned for 125 years, and that operates much more efficiently than in surrounding communities. And the reason they do is they invest in tree trimming and they invest in line crews, much more than the surrounding communities that are served by for-profit companies. And that's why we don't have to go to hotels and motels when we lose our electricity. They anticipate that, and they make that investment ahead of time. And then I thought to myself, I'm going out 30 years, Eric. You're going to be around, but I'm going to be planted somewhere in Hingham here.
Not being trimmed.
But I'm placing myself 30 years out, and I ask myself the question, would we want to sell the lighting plant because an out-of-state company is telling us that they have more expertise and can be doing it cheaper than we're doing it? Of course, that's kind of a laughable question. The answer is no. I imagine us being in the same place with the water company 30 years from now. That we are turning over to the next generation and the generation after that a public utility that we're going to be proud of, and that we know we're going to be running better than anybody else. So I'm voting in favor. Yeah.
David Lee.
I just have a couple things to say. When I came here in 1990, it was because my best friends from law school, their view of the world is you move to the best place in the world to live, and then you convince your friends to move here. And so I have never regretted that move at all. And one of the things about that is it is Hingham is very special. And as I'm now about to retire, people keep saying, but aren't you going to go somewhere warmer? It's like winter is worth putting up for to live in Hingham. Because it is the best place to be. I am sure on the issue of governance, there will be challenges because it's a new venture. I also have no doubt that given the people that work for the town and the people who lead the town, there will be people who will be hired to deal with those challenges, and the challenges will be met. So I don't fear those in any way. As I said earlier, the transparency of this process has been eye-opening to me in many ways, and one of them is I've thought about if we don't purchase the water company, we won't be asked to have this debate the next time Aquarian is sold. And the odds are, given history, they'll be sold again. And in fact, if I think about the transparency, we've even let Aquarian take sort of part in this process. We've heard from folks, and I appreciate they are a for-profit company. They're doing what they're supposed to do. But they too have been heard, as have our citizens from other towns. And so I think that this is a positive part of a process that requires open meeting and open discussion. And I think, as I said earlier, that bodes well for this being something that will work. And I support the article as well as the other 3 articles.
George.
I have nothing additional to add to my earlier comments.
Thank you, George. Libby?
Very briefly, I would just say on the financial side, I don't see on a short-term basis where it's really a material savings for ratepayers. There's no question in year 31, there is a savings. But I just, I don't think even the sensitivity analysis says it's material in the short term because there's, several factors we can't really anticipate. I think on the operating side, I have that same concern about the O&M contract not being in place and what that's going to ultimately come in at price-wise. And so I think that's something that should be in place before we take the vote. And on the governance issue, I still feel like there are issues to be resolved that haven't been fleshed out. I see the benefits in the future. I see the watershed benefits. But this is something that we're trying to decide right now, and it's a question of, am I comfortable with everything right now? And I'm not saying I have to have whatever, beyond a reasonable doubt, and over here it's burden of proof and all these legal thresholds. I just know what I'm comfortable with and how I think the process is going to work and the transparency and a number of different issues when it comes to governance. And so I say, would this make sense at some point? Probably, maybe, but I don't know that it does right now, given a couple of really important pieces of information we don't have. So that's why I am not supporting these articles at this point.
Thank you, Libby. Erin?
I just wanted to quickly say that, it's a privilege. It's really a privilege to have the opportunity to serve on the advisory committee, primarily because I feel our role is to listen and to learn and not necessarily advocate. And I sit here tonight listening to my colleagues, and it's evident to me how much the study group, all of the study groups, how much work has been done, and also how much of that work has been consumed by my colleagues.
So anything that I would say would be redundant to what has been said tonight or what I said the other night, but I am in favor of this article.
Victor?
I think it's all been said.
You'll be relieved to know that I think it's all been said as well. We come to vote, ladies and gentlemen, on the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Anybody abstaining? I believe that's 11-2, right? Would you like to be recorded? Let us just make a note for a moment. Okay. We turn now to Article NN. Okay, and for those that are keeping track, we want the version of NN that Bob circulated late in the afternoon.
Actually,
Oh,
you want the one that I handed out tonight?
okay. It was outside the folders. Yep. I think we got the right one. Go.
What has changed, Bob?
Most of the changes were in the recommendation. So if would, Madam Chair,
What
you'd
would
like me
you-
to read the recommendation?
You want to, yeah, go ahead. We're not taking comment tonight, sir.
I was just wondering, would it be possible to get a copy of the version that the committee's debating?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So the recommended motion is,
Wait a minute. Are you making the motion? Yes, make the motion. Make the motion.
Making the motion.
Making the motion.
We are making this happen. It's only 10:10.
let the town of Hingham vote to authorize its Board of Selectmen to act as the Board of Water Commissioners pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 39E, and all other applicable laws, and with all the powers and duties associated therewith, to manage, improve, and control the water system purchased pursuant to Article MM of the 2019 Annual Meeting of the Town of Hingham, including the authority to hire a superintendent and to enter into all contracts necessary to manage, improve, and control said water system. And that the town of Hingham establish a transition and evaluation committee composed of 5 members, with 3 members to be appointed by the moderator and 2 members to be appointed by the Board of Selectmen for the purpose of advising on all water system transition matters and conducting a study of the governance and operation of the water system, and to report annually to the moderator and the Board of Selectmen, and to make its recommendations based on that study to the moderator and the Board of Selectmen upon the conclusion of its study. And that the town of Hingham establish a Citizens Advisory Board to be comprised of 5 members appointed by the town of Hingham Board of Selectmen, which shall include 1 member nominated by the town of Hull Board of Selectmen and 1 member nominated by the town of Cohasset Board of Selectmen for the purpose of assisting the ratepayers of the water system and advising and informing the water superintendent and the town of Hingham Board of Selectmen of concerns or issues raised by ratepayers of the water system.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion, ladies and gentlemen. My goodness, a quiet advisory committee.
A tired advisory committee.
Any additional discussion necessary, or shall we come to vote?
No, if there's
I say
no.
we vote.
Okay. All those in favor of Article NN?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay. Would you like to be recorded?
Yes.
Yes? Vic? So that's 11-2-0, and we're recording Eric and Libby. Thank you. We now come to consider Article 00, which is the Enterprise Fund, and is also Mr. Curley's.
Okay, and the recommended motion is that the town of Hingham vote to accept the provisions of Mass General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 53F and 1/2, and establish a water system enterprise fund for the operation of the water system purchased pursuant to Article MM of the 2019 Town of Hingham Annual Town Meeting, and to require that all receipts, revenues, and funds received from the acquisition and operation of said water system shall be deposited into said water system enterprise fund, and that all salaries, expenses, capital expenditures, and debt service payments associated therewith shall be paid from said water system enterprise fund, and to raise and appropriate or transfer a sum of money from the receipts, revenues, and funds received from the acquisition and operation of said water system to operate said water system, and to be expended by the Board of Selectmen acting as the Board of Water Commissioners as follows. Recommended budget, salaries, $240,120. Operating expenses, $4,420,000. Payment in lieu of taxes, $830,503. Debt service, acquisition and capital, $2,688,662. Revenue budgeted surplus, $4,867,883. Total water company enterprise fund appropriation, $13,047,168.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there discussion?
So I think it's important just to note that if the town supports the acquisition of the water company, this seems to be really the only sensible way to go in terms of having an enterprise fund and segregating out the revenues and liabilities and costs.
Additional conversation about the enterprise fund? We come to vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Abstaining. And Eric and Libby, would you like to be recorded?
I mean, yeah.
Okay. If I don't write it down, folks, it doesn't happen. Okay, and we come to consider the last article of the evening, PP, which is the transition costs. And Libby, that's you.
Yep, that the town of Hingham vote to appropriate an amount not.
So you are recommending, right?
Yeah, the recommended motion is that the town of Hingham vote to appropriate an amount not in excess of $250,000 from available reserves to be used for any transition costs associated with the purchase of the water system pursuant to Article MM of the 2019 Town of Hingham Annual Town Meeting, including but not limited to engineering, legal, consulting, salaries, or other costs, provided that said sum shall be reimbursed to the town of Hingham from the proceeds of the bond issued by the town of Hingham for the purchase of said water system or act on anything thereto.
I think we probably don't need that last phrase.
Oh, yeah.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second? Yeah, I did.
Discussion.
Again, if we're going ahead with the acquisition of the water company, it makes eminent sense to have funding available to fund transition costs prior to the actual bonding and acquisition, receiving of other funding.
Additional comment? We come to vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Abstaining? Are we recording our same members? Okay. Well. As we wrap up our consideration of the water articles, on behalf of the advisory committee, I'd like to thank those who have helped us come to this recommendation. We appreciate the interest, the comments, and the information that were provided by members of the public on this question, including our neighbors in Hull. I have been impressed with the level of interest and the commitment of many of our commentators on both sides of the question. I'd like to thank the aquarium representatives for the information and perspective that they have provided. It has been helpful to learn from their point of view. I would like to thank the town officials, the selectmen, the Water Acquisition Study Committee, the town staff, the consultants and advisors who have invested so much time, and in many cases, so many years, on this question. They have walked through much of this research before, but they have been generous in helping us catch up with them. And personally, I think we owe the advisory subcommittee a round of applause.
Especially its chairman.
Especially its chairman. I have been so proud of your thorough, thoughtful, respectful deliberations. Thank you so much. We have a little bit of quick business to do that is unrelated to the water company. So can we have a quick liaison update on the schools? These are going to be one-way updates because we didn't post them.
Yeah, so just to report the final closure on the school committee budget, the school committee voted on March 11th to approve an FY20 budget that was consistent with the dollar amount that ACES and ADCOM approved, as well as the Board of Selectmen of $54,319,826.
Whatever the right number is.
Yeah, 826.
Okay. And my report from the selectmen is that they also revoted the budget to match the advisory committee budget. So we will all be going into town meeting supporting the same budget. Our next meeting is likely to be April 9th. Okay. Oh, yes, you had one too. I'm sorry, David.
I just had a brief liaison report from the Affordable Housing Trust. I just thought that the advisory committee would be interested in knowing that using that opportunity fund that's been funded over several town meetings, the Affordable Housing Trust has a purchase and sale agreement on a two-family home on Road Circle. And that's, I just think, a very exciting opportunity, and I thought people would want to know that.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next meeting is likely to be April 9th for town meeting preparation and other matters. You're actually going to have your Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays to yourself for a little while. Thank you for
Sundays too?
Saturdays and Sundays.
Chairman, can I inquire where the secretary is going to be tomorrow evening in case we have an emergency meeting?
I'm going to be sipping something at Siesta Key.
No bragging, no bragging. May I have a motion?
Move we adjourn.
Yeah, here. Thank you, everyone. Marvelous job.